Oh, okay. Yeah, I hit the record button here, so premium subscribers will hear about the not things that we can't talk about, the
Well,
secrets.
I
Oh,
don't put
oh,
out the secrets. That's not,
oh.
we're not trying to get in trouble here.
Nope, nope. Uh, okie dokie. So I had Volvo's new seatbelt tech, Ram's so-called symbol of protest, which we had got to talk about because that's funny.
Okay.
Rare
I
earth
saw
mineral
that it's a
supply
thing,
issues.
but I didn't see what it looked like.
Yep. And then we have one viewer phone-in question, and then the sort of question about 48-volt things. Are we ever getting there?
Yeah.
Um,
Give me one sec to
and that
check out the viewer question.
I have the video locked and loaded on that one, or the audio locked and loaded on that one.
Okay.
Uh, and then there are obviously lots of things coming up that we can't talk about yet. So I did have one little blurb. Did I send you that one from Cadillac? Okay, so we can talk about OpticV because that embargo is up the day this episode will go live. So
Okay.
we can talk about that. Um, not too much talk about their nutshell 275 miles of driving, same battery pack, 519 horsepower. They didn't change charging or anything else, but it is finally getting the J3400 charging connector, which is interesting.
Yep. I was curious and hoping. I was wondering if we would see the SS powertrain drop into the V from the Blazer, but it seems like it's
Mm-hmm.
powered. Well, it's a lower horsepower number than we found in that Blazer SS. So I'm wondering what
Yeah.
combination of motors they're using. Because it's got to
My
be stuff within the
guess,
stable.
yeah, my guess is it's probably the exact same motors, but the battery voltage is lower with that
That
battery versus the
that
100
makes sense.
kilowatt hour battery. So I bet that that's why it's not as powerful, that it just affects maximum power output.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So are we, let me know when we're ready to begin.
Yes, 3 minutes
Oh,
max. Just
someone lost her pacifier slash binky slash dummy slash whatever everybody wants to call
is
it.
it a pacifier or is it a binky? Is there a strong stance over there on that one?
I really don't care what it's called somehow.
Okay.
The British call them dummies, and I always thought that was kind of funny, but
Hmm. As in like
imitation
dummy
nipple?
nipple?
I think so.
Okay.
We could go for imitation nipple here, you know.
Him nip.
Yep. The sucking reflex is strong with this one. She's got it down.
Okay,
She's
good.
chugging milk like a drunken sailor. So,
That's survival instinct. It's a good thing.
yep.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, we ready to start?
Ready to roll with what you got.
Okay. And then we'll start and we'll introduce her and then I'll pass her off to Rob or someone else.
I was gonna
Okay.
ask you want me to change my camera angle, or you're
No,
gonna
I'll adjust mine up to normal, here in a second.
Indeed.
Well, hello, 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. Today we have our special guest here. She's only a few days old, so I'm just gonna hand her off to someone else. But everybody, say hi.
The
Hi.
newest member of the Auto Buyers Guide team.
Newest member, yeah. She's gonna be doing some seat tests for us soon. It's not gonna be on payroll, child labor. So, Travis, it is kind of funny having my parents here at the same time has been entertaining because all sorts of things from my childhood are now becoming clearer. Let's just put it that way.
That makes sense. Before we get too far, I just want to let you know, in the comment section, there are a lot of folks who want a baby-focused episode. They want to hear about the journey of the birth and how we all got here and why you're in Bogota and that sort of thing. I'm not sure how much you want
Ah,
or need to dive into it, but I told them I would tell you, so consider the message passed along.
Delivered. Okay, so we can make sure we carve out 5 minutes at the end, and we will have the Reader's Digest version of this there. So
There you go.
if I'm sleep deprived, things were not. She was very awake, very awake. Anyway, what have you seen in the news this week? Let's start with the news. What have you seen that has tickled your fancy, piqued your interest, shall we say?
Well, personally versus professionally, it turns out that if you break up with the president of the United States, it is not great for your business.
Really?
On how close that relationship was. And again, that's just
Imagine.
if we try to for a moment to take the politics out of it, it's a fascinating experiment to see what happens in a capsule. That's been interesting to watch, but more from like the soap opera end of things than the professional curiosity.
Yeah.
I also saw a headline that spooked me for a second that said Kia only sold 30 odd some EV9s last month, and I went, "Ooh, what's going on there?" But that's the danger of headlines, but also the power of headlines. I mean, it got me to click it, and it turns out it's mostly them just moving inventory from one calendar year to the next. And so obviously it's not because there were tons sitting there, there weren't that many left, and they aren't getting a whole lot more because they're trying to get rid of everything all in one. So that was the power of the headline. Got me to click, but worth clicking because then you get the rest of the story. So just a note to all of our listeners is always click, especially if it sounds very sensational. There's probably more going on to the story.
Yeah, always read into that one a little bit. The funny part of that also is it reminds me of this Ram announcement. So, by now everybody knows Ram has brought back the V8. Nick was out there in Detroit taking a look at the HEMI truck, and I think part of me had hoped beyond hope that it would be at least a lightly massaged version of said HEMI V8, and it is in fact not. It is the exact same HEMI V8. But I found copy paste. Yep. I found the funniest thing about this though is not to throw people under the bus, but hey, he's the CEO supposedly of Ram, Tim Kuniskis. He came out of retirement to save Ram, and I've met Tim. He's a nice guy. But he's a good showman here. At any rate, so they have this silly new logo on the quarter panel, the front fender, whatever you want to call it, of the new Ram 1500 for 2026 with the V8. It's kind of got a ram's head. It's got little side pipes coming out there, and it's their so-called symbol of protest. They're protesting, but this is the funny part. What are they protesting? Their own dumb decisions. They canceled the V8 engine. Nobody made them do it. It's not like, Nancy Pelosi came down and arm wrestled them into canceling the V8 because
just they go back to the assembly line. Just no more. You can't do it.
Symbol of protest is the dumbest thing on earth to call that when it is your own stupidity that you did it in the first place. I mean, props to Stellantis and Ram.
It'll probably
props to Stellantis and Ram figuring it out.
Some merch.
Yes, they're going to sell the merch. It is a cute logo. I do like it. Yeah. I actually like the logo. I think it's adorable because they have the Super Bee, logos and some things. They've had the cute Hornet logo on the Dodge Hornet. Like, they've been good at creating these little cartoony caricature logos for the front and sides of vehicles, etc. So I think the logo's spot on. The branding around this is a little weird, cringy. Because let's back up the story. So they're trying to talk out of both sides of their mouth, because in the press release and their presentation, they admitted they made a mistake. They're like, hey, my bad. We canceled it. We shouldn't have canceled it. But then they're also somewhat trying to say that they were forced into this decision when they absolutely were not. Just check out GM's product line. It's like all V8 all day long. No problem there. Ford still sells a V8. They could have sold a V8 if they'd wanted to. The real reason is that the executives at Stellantis, who ended up losing their job over part of this, they wanted to streamline engine manufacturing, have higher parts commonalities, lower costs, all that jazz. And the truth of the matter is the 3-liter Hurricane inline 6 has a lot of parts in common with the 2-liter turbo, and that 2-liter turbo is in the same general family as some of the 2-liter turbos in Europe. And I wouldn't be surprised if other European models started getting that inline 6 at some point. So parts commonality, big deal there. Really had nothing to do with emissions or fuel economy.
Well, and for what it's worth, I mean, it's not a V8, but that's a nice engine, that inline six.
Mm-hmm.
You get the standard output, the high output. There's a lot to like about that, but I get it. It's not a V8. So,
And I am torn a little bit because if you tow regularly, you're going to want the V8. And that is one of the reasons that I was sad that it was gone. Because I said that in our videos that there is a use case for the V8. If you live in hilly or mountainous areas, especially, the engine braking potential is significantly better. If your truck lives with a trailer attached to it, you're probably also going to get better fuel economy, perhaps towing some of those heavier loads. And of course, the high output version wants premium unleaded. The 5.7 liter wants mid-grade, but it runs fine on regular unleaded. So, it could be a little cheaper there to operate. Not cheaper to buy, though.
You probably wanted the diesel in the first place. Whether you paid for the diesel or not, you probably are interested in the diesel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're probably going to buy the GM one with the inline six diesel, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But that 5.7, so basically the same one as before, 395 horsepower, cylinder deactivation. It has the ETorque mild hybrid system on it, and it's going to cost you $2,895. That breaks down to the same upgrade cost as the standard output Hurricane, because the 3.6 liter V6 is standard. So then over the Hurricane engine, it's $1,200, but you actually lose power because you go from 420 horsepower down to 395.
That's what I'm saying. Those Hurricane engines are nice, and if that's those are my options. The Pentastar, the Hemi coming back, or the Hurricane. I'm taking Hurricane pretty much every day of the week. Now I'm not doing any towing, admittedly, but even if I was towing, it would just be occasionally. And so for everyday use, the Hurricane would be probably the best fit. But yeah, good news. It's back. We've got a really fun symbol of protest. I wouldn't mind putting one up here in the corner, spruce things up a little bit. But
symbol of protest.
I put this merch at our next Ram event. That's all I'm saying.
Fight the patriarchy that we created ourselves and we want to fight against. They have said that they expect it to be a relatively modest percentage of sales over time. And that's probably why they didn't make too many changes. It's possible there may be some very minor emissions changes for future compliance. Most likely, though, most likely not. So here's how it breaks down. $2,895 option over the 3.6 liter V6, and it's going to be available as an option in all those models where that 3.6 liter V6 was standard. So that's all the way through Bighorn. It looks like the Rebel is also going to have it available. It's probably going to be a no-cost option in that model, it looks like. So basically, the models that have the standard output version of the Hurricane engine, it's going to be a smaller bump up. Models that have the high output version of the Hurricane engine, you may or may not be able to select it. So Limited and Longhorn and Tungsten, if I recall correctly. I'm sure commenters will let us know down there, but it's basically those top two trims. Those you will not be able to get it. You will have to get more power. So, big whoop, ooh, wow. You have to get 540 horsepower in those.
Life is just not fair sometimes. It's
so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah.
But Ram says it looks like availability of the V8 is going to be broader than in the Ford F-150 lineup and that 5-liter V8. But they're saying that they expect the sales split to actually be substantially similar to the F-150 lineup. They said they think they're going to see a bit of a surge initially, some pent-up demand, people that might have wanted a V8 Ram that didn't get one. So they're expecting maybe for the first few months, 40% of sales to be the Hemi, but after that, maybe 20 to 25% Hemi. So engine options, quarter of the volume. Yeah.
We end up with some older engines there between that Pentastar and the Hemi. The Hurricane being the new kid on the block, but again, that's probably still the direction I would end up going.
Yeah, if I were just daily driving and hauling and not towing or towing light loads, I could see a pretty good selling proposition for the Pentastar V6 because it has been really strangely reliable and it's real cheap to fix and maintain. It's naturally aspirated. It's small in the engine bay, so it's easy to work on just physically. There's a lot of room in the engine bay to work on it.
Mhm.
And because they make so many of those engines, I think peak production for that 3.6 liter V6 was something like 1.5 million units a year. It's probably gone down because of the number of vehicles that it's
Yeah.
in. But Stellantis and Chrysler were making a ton of those 3.6 liter engines. So oil
Yeah.
filters and every repair and replacement and maintenance parts pretty
Buy
darn
yourself a
cheap on
spare,
that
put it in
thing.
the bed just in case, you know.
Yeah. And if you do need a new engine, the engine itself is actually relatively inexpensive, especially compared to some of the twin turbos, which is logically the reason that, we still have that naturally aspirated engine in the Ford lineup as well.
Yep.
And both of those, the Ford base V6 and the Chrysler base V6, they're probably going to be cheaper to keep around than the 2.7 liter turbo in the GM lineup long term, and of course the twin turbo in the Tundra.
Yeah, but well, but it doesn't have the same personality. But they all have different personalities, right?
No,
And
yeah.
that's that's the beauty of options. You get to choose. You can have your truck,
Hmm.
which can fit you, your family, and I guess whatever you want to take for the weekend, or in the trailer, or the kids' backpacks on the way to school, and you can make it sound however you want. And actually, here's one thing: if you're bringing back the Hemi like they are, go ahead and put that sport exhaust as standard, because I think right now, especially right now, that's a big reason people are going to jump to this V8, is because they're using it for
And
their
indeed
everyday
they
use,
did.
and they want it to sound like the V8. So there you go. That
Hmm.
I want the symbol of protest stamped on the
Yeah.
sport exhaust as well.
I have to admit that the 5.7 sounds better than GM's 5.3 and sounds better than Ford's 5 liter Coyote V8 in the F-150. I do really like the sound of GM's 6.2 though. I think it has a more discreet low-end burble. You can tell it's a big engine, but it's not raw in your face. But it is interesting that, yeah, they made that sport exhaust standard in every single little model. But
Mhm.
then they also made the mild hybrid system standard, which is kind of a weird twist there as well.
I'm guessing a lot of that is about simplifying production and making sure that everything is just streamlined. And they say, hey, enough people are
Hmm.
probably going to be interested here. We're just doing it.
Yeah, my memory is bad because I don't think they ever disclosed how many ETorques they were selling in the before times when it was before the Hurricane engine existed, because it was available with and without the ETorque setup.
Right.
Most likely, the eTorque being around is for corporate average fuel economy reasons, because it does get a bump in CAFE ratings because of that mild hybrid setup. It is a pretty mild hybrid. We're talking a 0.5 kilowatt
Yeah.
hour battery pack.
Yeah.
It simplifies things in the engine, of course, because it is the starter and the alternator. So there's a little bit of a simplification there. It adds some extra torque at the low end. So right off the bat, you get a bump of torque, about 130 foot-pounds of torque, something like that, as I recall. It also smooths out shifts, and it allows the cylinder deactivation system to operate a little bit longer, because if you just need a little oomph of torque for just a moment, it doesn't have to drop out of cylinder deactivation. It can just augment it with the motor. But it's a very, very mild hybrid. The only real downside and maintenance longer term is the belt. Since it's a belt alternator starter type hybrid, that belt's going to need to be replaced more frequently than a regular drive belt. It's also a bigger, chunkier belt. And should anything ever go wrong with the eTorque motor generator unit, that's obviously going to be more than an alternator. But by all appearances, it's not necessarily an enormous expense, because it's not a very big motor. So
Yeah.
it was an
No.
interesting decision, I'd say.
I was going to say, you're probably right that it's about standards. Obviously, bringing the V8 back
Hmm.
is great, but standards still do exist. So every little thing that can help certainly makes sense. Streamlined production, yes. A little bit more power, a better ownership experience. Obviously the maintenance is going to be a little bit more, but your
Hmm.
everyday driving is going to be a little bit nicer. And there are a lot of folks who just go ahead and turn off, engine auto stop starts anyway. So I don't think that's going to
Hmm.
be too much of a concern.
What I think would have been better, though, uh, or at least a selling point for this, would have been if they had just taken one semi step further and given this a higher output AC inverter,
Mhm.
because the eTorque motor should be able, let's see if I can figure this out here. What should this be able to deliver? This should be able to do about, I would say, comfortably 6 or 7 kilowatts power output based on the specifications that we have for the motor. There's an onboard 3 kilowatt DC-DC conversion, so they can do 3 kilowatts of 12 volt power output, which is a ton of power. But they didn't give us any additional AC power output. And I think that would have been better because they could have tried to sell this not as a F-150 hybrid competitor exactly, but as a functional competitor to that same workplace sales proposition that Ford has with that hybrid there, where they're like, hey, yeah, Pro Power Assist, right? And here you could have your V8 power and your V8 soundtrack, and you could have, running power tools and whatever off the back. I think that would have been pretty handy.
It's the best of all worlds. RAM.
Yeah.
Something like that.
They could put a little power plug on the back of the symbol of protest. That little flying V had a little power plug on the back.
Yeah, exactly. You lift up the badge and there's the plug. It's the whole thing.
Something like that. Yeah.
It's crazy. We don't get
more
marketing, think tanks.
Yeah. I just don't know what's up there. I have been to a few things. Can I talk about them? Yeah, I think I can talk about the process. I have been to, I can't talk about the product, but I can talk about the process. I have been to a few focus group things for industry experts. Those are really weird and interesting because manufacturers are trying to ask you questions like, well, how do you think customers look at these options? Do they like these screen sizes, those screen sizes? What do you think they care about these features? How much do you think they're willing to pay for these features and those features, et cetera? So it is kind of interesting experience. But I honestly wonder sometimes how much they use that info to just justify their own biases and how much actually informs future product. I don't think we'll ever know, but
right.
Is
are you
interesting.
creating a new line in the notes, or are they just circling a line they already had?
Yeah. Speaking of new plugs, though, GM is finally getting a J3400 plug right about when I'm wondering, again, like we said last time, is J3400 a little cart before the horse, especially with Tesla's, shall we say, sales stagnation? I think in my mind, when everybody signed on to this standard, we thought that Tesla was going to be roaring forward and they really were going to be selling 500,000 Cybertrucks. Well, I don't know. Did you ever think they'd sell 500,000 Cybertrucks?
Who thought that? Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I understand who
Someone
the we
at
is.
Tesla. I think before we actually saw the Cybertruck and my eyes were burned, I think honestly I could have believed that sales trajectory. I think there was a plausible thing that they could have done that if they had made a truck that looked like a truck.
The Tesla truck, not the Cybertruck.
Yeah. If it had been that, and it was $39,000 they claimed it was, if those things had been real, I could see them making a ton of trucks. And in that world,
those things have been real. There
there's
might be one in my driveway.
Yeah. And I could have seen everybody else really being super aggressive. Yeah, we must join this thing because their sales trajectory is so huge, and how can you be left behind? But we're in a world now where Lightning's outselling it, and GM's trucks are almost outselling it with a fantastically high MSRP.
I mean, I was looking at some GM trucks earlier this week, and they do not have the J3400 NACS connector, and this is for the 2026 model year.
Yes, but for 2026, the Optic will, but only the OpticV.
I mean, it's sort of interesting that they're going to do like a step forward program, because I imagine those Vs are all in the same line. So I guess we're slowly integrating the new part into the process, but it's there. It'll be there for sure.
And I don't know why they're taking I understand why they're taking a slow approach. They're like, these products have been in the pipeline, they're fully designed, we don't want to spend the money to redesign them until we have to. But then why just one trim of the Optic? Do they really need to use up that many more parts that are just hanging out there?
It's possible. I mean, that's possible. I like I said, it really does add a complication while building these things. So why not do it all at once? I don't think many people are looking at this as, oh, you know what? I should get the V over the standard Optic, because this one, no one's going to do that. No one's going to go, oh, this one has the right plug, we should get that one.
Yeah,
I don't see know. That
I would. anyone that's like a daily reader of Inside EVs, I'm betting they probably would.
You think so?
But
I mean, obviously
I
there's going to be a
honestly I
cost
think so.
associated. That V isn't going to be cheaper. There's no
Yeah.
way. So I
One
mean,
interesting touch,
we know this, but
yeah. One interesting thing, though, there was a news report. I had to find it later, but apparently, Cadillac's EV conquests are almost entirely coming at the expense of Tesla. It is interesting that a lot of Tesla former owners are going to Cadillac of all brands for their next EV.
okay. So you're right. That seems like an unusual transition, but I will say that I imagine most electric vehicle conquests are coming from Tesla, right? That's
That's true.
like
True. 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 Yeah.
it's sort of a default where Tesla
Mm-hmm,
sold
mm-hmm.
more than, I think even into last year, sold more than 50% of the electric vehicles in the United States. And
Mm-hmm.
they've got a decade of that basically. I mean, I know Model S didn't sell in huge numbers, blah blah blah. But as soon as that Model 3 hit, it was, hey, most of the
Mm-hmm.
electric vehicles sold are Teslas. So that makes sense from a conquest standpoint. But when you talk about moving from one to the other, I wonder if this is the customer who came from a obviously a much more conventional vehicle and said, "Oh, this Tesla is very strange, very different. I don't know if I like that." I wonder what the turnover rate is there. Is that
Mm-hmm.
people who are trading in their Teslas sooner than later, or are these 5 year, 6 year
Mm-hmm.
owners
Mm-hmm.
who are going a different direction, or are they 2 or 3 year owners who are looking for something new?
Yeah.
That one would be the most interesting to me. Is what's that turnover time? Because that kind of tells you what whether that customer was unsatisfied with the
Mm-hmm.
Tesla experience, whether they're unsatisfied with the product. That would be what I'd be most interested in. But Cadillac is an
Yeah.
interesting story
Unfortunately,
because
we'd have.
Tesla's so minimalist and
Yeah.
Cadillac is not.
Unfortunately, we'd have to pay a fortune to get access to the
Yep.
raw S&P Global Mobility data that would tell us this. But I would say that since most of Cadillac's volume so far has been in Lyric, and given its price tag, even its lease rates are relatively high, the most likely defection from Tesla is probably not from their volume products, where it's easier to say the volume is there for Tesla. It seems like it's more likely to be Model S and X, lower
Next.
volume products whose volume is more similar to Cadillac's volume with that particular product. Actually, I'm pretty sure Lyric outsells S and X at the moment. But S and X are old, mind you. So some of this could be and that's probably part of this, is that the original product they had in the Tesla lineup has not changed. Especially if you're an S or an X owner, maybe you're on your second one or whatever, and so maybe you're looking further afield because you're like, it hasn't changed enough. The next one's not going to change enough. Maybe I'll go look somewhere else. But I also kind of wonder if maybe some of this is just a decision that maybe they're ready for regular car features again. Maybe they want buttons and switches and
And
that
they're
kind
not
of
going to
thing.
miss the lack of Android Auto or Apple CarPlay because they never had it in their Tesla to begin with.
Yeah. Or if they lyric, they'll actually get it for a
Yeah.
little bit of a moment, just not an
Yeah.
optic. But anyway, OpticV. So OpticV. Let's see if we can take a look at some of these slides here they sent out. So MSRP 68,795. How does that strike you? That strikes me a tiny bit high.
It is a little bit high. I mean, it's the performance version, and I think kind of for the dollar, you're going to be getting a lot of bang for the buck. But you look
Mm-hmm.
at something like the Blazer EVSS, and that's going to be right in that ballpark. I mean, well, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
the ballpark, but that's a bigger vehicle, and it's
Yeah.
actually a significantly bigger vehicle. When you look at how much
Yeah.
space you have to use, that optic gets tight comparatively. So that's something to
It
consider,
definitely
obviously.
does.
And the performance doesn't match what we get on the Blazer EVSS either.
No, 3.5 seconds, 0 to 60, and 519 horsepower, 650 pound-feet of torque. I think and 275 miles of range, key things to keep in mind here. So Blazer is going to be quicker and bigger. Model Y is going to be cheaper and faster and longer range and faster charging and but have a Tesla
And
logo on it.
correct,
Um,
and probably better riding with the newer suspension. I'm curious to see. I like the way the optic rides, but the
mhm.
I think the
This will have
Model
an
Y
adaptive
is
suspension system.
well, and that'll be the first, right, for the optic. It did not have it
First for the
adapted
optic, yeah.
standards, so that one I'm curious about.
Hmm.
And but obviously you're paying for that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's part of that 68,000 starting
It
price.
looks like
And I'm
it's going
also
to
curious
have,
about packaging, but
yeah, it looks like it's going to have Sport Contact 6 performance tires in a 275/40 R21, um,
it's a pretty wide
and
tire.
Brembo front brakes. So they did some nice things. Standard all season or available summer tires, Brembo front brakes, etc. It's still got the big old huge LCDs in there.
Interesting matchup with what we have on Blazer EVSS because they have the Brembo front brakes, but only the Brembo fronts. They're not doing it in all four corners. That feels like a
Hmm.
interesting way to say Brembo's here, but just
Yeah,
there, not here,
that's
just there.
pretty common.
Hmm.
I think the
Well,
logic
obviously the front
partially
brakes are the ones
is
working the hardest.
right. And I think part of the logic there also is that their brakes aren't going to be used maybe as much because it can regen
Yeah.
significantly. Yeah, but it is pretty common to do Brembo fronts and just regular old stock rears in a lot of things out there. Brembo's all the way around tends to be more rare. What do you
Yeah.
think of the blue accents inside? I really love the blue accents that GM has been doing lately. The brake calipers are also blue there, by the way, as you can see. But
Mhm.
I have to admit, this blue plastic trim and the blue on the back, I love the blue, but it's the exact same shade of blue that we find in a lot of Chevys.
Yeah, isn't it? I'm trying to
Does
remember.
that
I
matter?
think it's similar to what we see in the Lyric, one of the Lyric Sport
Mm-hmm.
interiors, and I like the coloring of it, but it feels a little bit cheap. It
Mm.
doesn't come across the right way. I really appreciate the fact that the accent color isn't red. I am kind
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
just sick of red being the performance color. Give me something different. Give me,
Mm-hmm.
obviously it has to match a theme, but this brighter cobalty type blue I think is a good fit. But yeah, let me see it in person. Let me get there. Let me see it in person. But I'm a little worried it'll feel a little bit cheap, and that's not what you're looking for in your expensive optic.
Yeah. I like the color though. I do have to admit
Mhm. I
a
do. Yep.
strong attraction to the blue accents. And
And it's
this
a
is
little bit
this is
purpley
why
too.
it stuck in my head though, because the Chevy Trax, the cheapest Chevy, has the exact same blue accents, and I think those look really good in that one too. I'm like, ooh, I like the interior of the Chevy Trax with the blue accents.
Hmm.
And then I saw this photo, and I'm like, ooh, I like the interior with the blue accents, just like the Chevy Trax. But
And there's
you
similar
know,
blue accents and like I think it's the TRD Sport Tacoma, similar
mm-hmm,
kind of a blue thing going there, and that
yeah,
kind of feels cheap in that model too. So
mm-hmm,
again, implementation is going to be really important, and it looks like it's just a strip of it. It's obviously not like a whole
mm-hmm.
dashboard full. That would really change the experience.
So back on the specs, you were asking earlier, we were chatting before recording about the power specs and what the motors are. My guess, although GM has not said this, my guess is that it's the same motor package as Blazer SS and largely Lyric probably as well, but the battery voltage is lower in their 85 kilowatt hour pack. Actually, the battery voltage in this GM 85 kilowatt hour pack is strangely low. It is one of the lowest voltage EVs available in the US. And the amount of power you can deliver to the motors is dependent on that because there's only so much
Right.
current you can yank out of the battery. So more cells, more current capability out of the battery, etc. This also does present a charging challenge. I will caution anybody out there looking at Optic or OpticV or even Blazer and Equinox with that 85 kilowatt hour battery pack. DC fast charging is going to be a bit of a bummer because 150 kilowatts approximately peak. I think ours tops out, our Blazer tops out at like 153, 155 on a good day.
Yeah.
You really will need a high current capable charging system, which makes sense for the J3400 connector because you can plug it into that Tesla station. They're a high current capable station, so that'll work fine. But if you're going
Right.
to electrify America and you think you're going to be a good little person because you're like, well, my EV only charges at 150 kilowatts, I'll be a good EV steward and I won't occupy the 350 kilowatt station because someone else might need it. Actually, you need that station in order to hit 150 because if you go to a regular EA 150 station, you're going to be stuck below 100 kilowatts because of the current and voltage realities of that pack.
But your charging curve is going to be incredible, just flat. Yeah,
Or
it's
down there.
yeah, flat, but like here. the good news,
Yeah.
and I think people are learning this, and I think we'll keep chasing numbers for a while. But if you look at how much people actually DC fast charge, I don't think it's a big issue long term. It's just know your situation. We talked about on I believe it was
Mm-hmm.
our last podcast. Someone saying, "Hey, I road trip. It's 1,000 miles, and I do it in a day."
Mm-hmm.
That's a unique use case, and that person knows that. That's why
Yeah.
they brought it forward to us, because nobody else is doing that. Not regularly, not in a way that's significantly important, or
Yeah.
in a way that you say, you know what, that's I have a really weird use case. I'm going to rent a minivan for that road trip and make my life a whole lot
Yeah.
easier. Then you don't have to worry about it. So I would obviously love to see higher charging, especially in a vehicle that with this price tag. We just a couple weeks ago looked at the Toyota BZ, which got an improved charging up to 150 kilowatts. And I went, yeah, that's the bare minimum. And we're really talking bare
Yeah.
minimum, because these days it
Yeah.
is. And I don't want to see that bare minimum charging on my Cadillac, especially not my performance Cadillac. That feels like we're
Mm-hmm.
missing something there.
Yeah. And, I used to be in the party that said it doesn't matter so much because of the demographic that buys the new EV, but I will say that we are seeing a bit of a demographic shift in EV owners because we're seeing used EVs, CPO EVs out there on the market, people that are apartment dwelling or renters, just renters specifically, or generally rather, also condo owners, any mixed use, mixed multi-tenant kind of building. That can be tricky to charge your EV. It's funny, actually, the guy that lent us his Tesla Model S bought a $100,000 Tesla, doesn't have any home charging, so he charges exclusively at superchargers, which is kind of interesting.
I
And I
can
think we are
never,
starting to
ever,
see,
ever recommend that.
yeah, I wouldn't either, but if you're dedicated to the cause, then I guess you just accept that that is a limitation.
Yeah.
This is why I advocate for workplace charging. I think it should just be at the office. That solves the problem, but
Which we have, but I don't get to use. But good news, my workplace
yeah.
is mostly from home and or on the
Do you
road.
have workplace charging?
I do, yeah, but provided by myself is really how that one turns out. So
Hey, you work from home. It is workplace charging. You are in your workplace and you are
Mhm.
charging.
Yes, this
How
is
it
my place
goes.
of business. That or an airplane, and then I'm not really worried about charging. So
Yep.
yeah.
Other news that looked interesting to me this week was Volvo's upcoming EX60. That is going to be their two-row compact EV thing.
Mhm.
It's going to have new seatbelt technology that we'll see in other Volvos that will have sensors in the seat and the seat belts, and then some logic behind it. And it will take the weight and seat position, and therefore hopefully the geometry of the person, into account when adjusting seatbelt pretensioners and load limiters in the vehicle in the event of an accident. And they're claiming there are going to be about 10 different profiles for the seatbelts. So it's to reduce injury in the event of a major collision by using the actual size and weight of the person to decide how the seatbelt should interact with that person up front.
Leave it to Volvo to be pioneering future seatbelt technology, but it doesn't hurt to
Mm-hmm.
have a better idea of who's in the seat, because when we talk about
Mm-hmm.
basic testing, you have your certain percentiles, and the standard percentile male and the 5% or the 5 percentile woman are just two totally different profiles. And so those seats have
Mm-hmm.
to act for everyone, and they're 100%
Everybody.
going to do
Yeah.
different things at different times. So it makes sense to have a smarter seatbelt. The only downside is that if we only have 10, you're 100% going to run into a situation where somebody doesn't match that profile. And I'm just curious. I don't think Volvo would move forward without this, but just casually curious what the risk is if somebody seems to fit a profile but doesn't quite. I don't imagine there's any catastrophic failure.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, this technology wouldn't be rolling out. But let's just say, for example, the seat position. Let's say I'm 5'6" and I'm 300 pounds, but I have the seat all the way
Mm-hmm.
back, and that's just because I like having the seat all the way back. But the logic might assume that I'm a 7-foot human being, and then kind of program itself for that. It's a very fringe use case, but
I suppose
uh,
it's theoretically possible. I would assume your legs wouldn't really be long enough to make that work somehow. But the load profile is going to be basically based on weight. So I should probably back up here a bit because I recall, maybe 15 years ago or so, I was talking to a friend who was obsessed with safety. First-time parent, had twins. Twins are getting maybe about 3 or 4 years old, and they're like, they had an accident in another car when the kids weren't in the car. So this got them into this mode of like obsession with safety, and they're like, what's the safest car? What should I get? Should I get, and it literally was at the time Honda Pilot or Volvo XC90, and I was like, well, based on your statements and what's going on here, you should absolutely get the Volvo. Volvo and Mercedes are generally considered to be some of the most safe brands out there because they don't just follow the regular mandated crash test requirements for North America, for Europe, etc. They go above and beyond. All car manufacturers do their own testing, but Mercedes and Volvo are some of the few companies out there that are super dedicated and send significant portions of their budget on safety research and safety engineering, etc. Volvo, for instance, doesn't just read regular crash data. They look at real life crashes in Sweden, and then they replicate those crashes in their crash center with dummies in there to try and determine the loads. They will actually follow up with real life crash victims in Scandinavia over periods of time to find out how these safety systems interacted with them, what kind of injuries were sustained, what they can do to try and prevent these injuries in the future, et cetera. So it's definitely a different mentality with this, but we're also talking about a different and more expensive product. And so at the time, one of the big differences between XC90 and Pilot was that XC90 had load limiters and pretensioners at every seatbelt position in the vehicle, and Honda only had them up front because in the front, that's where you're getting government crash tests. And so in order to get IAHS and Euro NCAP scores and things like that they wanted, they needed to have load limiters and pretensioners up front. So I should probably back up and talk about what load limiters and pretensioners are. So in a collision, what you want to do is you want to pull the body into the seat as much as possible, pull all the slack out of the seatbelt, because you don't want a body to start moving forward and then suddenly smack a really small object like this in the chest, because then you're going to get broken bones, right? So you don't want to have the body moving forward and then suddenly get restrained. You want the restraint to be with the body to begin with. So the moment of a collision, the pretensioners will fire. They used to be pyrotechnic. They actually had a charge in there, and you'd have to replace the whole module after an accident. Now most of them are electric, and they basically yank the seatbelt really hard so that way it's tight against the body. It can even help pull you back into the seat slightly depending on the position. And then once the accident starts progressing and the forces are being transferred to the passenger cell and the body, then you actually want to release the seatbelt in a controlled fashion. So you don't just want to hold the body perfectly firm. You actually want to let the body decelerate slowly. So that way, again, lower risk of whiplash, broken bones, etc. So in the before times, manufacturers started introducing these systems to the front seats only because of crash tests. And now we're starting to see more cars where it's available in the outboard seat positions in the second row, sometimes the third row. Not all three-row vehicles have pretensioners and load limiters in the way back, but at this time Volvo did. And that was one of those things. It's like if you want to make sure that your child, especially with slimmer bone structures, etc., survives this crash, you want those load limiters because you need to have some give in this process rather than just have a belt that just locks in place like you'd get without them. And the other thing that's interesting is when you look at the old XC90, that puppy had been on sale for a super long period of time. The government and the IAHS started doing offset crash testing, especially the IAHS's small offset crash and the side impact crashes. The XC90 was designed, the first generation, was designed way before those new crash test parameters were even discussed or talked about. And no modification was necessary. XC90 passed with flying colors. Honda Pilot in that generation, not so much.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's one of those things. Like, it's part of the advantage of thinking ahead, but at the same time,
Hmm.
like I said, the commitment there is so far above and beyond. And these are there was a
And
conversation
the
had
price
about how do
tag
you make
too.
something right. Well, there's a conversation made about how do you make something less expensive, right? So, for example, you
Hmm.
could include less technology, but so much technology this day and age, is standard. For example, rear view cameras. Those are standard. Backup cams are a standard
Hmm.
requirement in vehicles these days. If you pull them out, it would save a couple bucks at least, right? Not just the camera module, but then the wiring and then the complexity.
Hmm.
But so much of this is required, and it really, there's a point where you say, when is it too much nannying? But the reality is that it's helping reduce deaths and significant injuries, and that's why all of
Hmm.
it moves forward. And actually, it's a weird world, but it's things like insurance companies who are pushing some of this technology forward, because they're the ones who have to do the payouts in the event of a collision for things like medical expenses. Like, it's not just the
Hmm.
manufacturer saying, "Hey, we should do this," and it's not just the government saying, "Hey, we should do this." There's a weird business case to keep people safe.
Hmm. And the sad and tricky part of it is that I think a lot of the industry had hoped and had even assumed that insurance rates would go down because of some of this technology. The counterpoint to that, unfortunately, is that we do see a dramatic reduction in newer cars with autonomous emergency braking in rear end style collisions involving those vehicles where they're at fault. So massive reduction. It's about 50% according to AAA. But because of the cost of these added systems, when you do end up in an
Ew.
accident, getting them all repaired and realigned is more expensive than it was before. So, what you're really saving is the risk of liability and medical expenses, which has been a savings, but not as much, I think, as people expected. And I don't think there has been enough of a drive to get insurance companies to refund those relatively small amounts of savings. So, it
Right.
does not appear that it's had a really big impact on actual insurance rates.
I promise I will not go off on a full tangent on this one, but one of the things that I here in the Pacific Northwest, we have a couple wildlife bridges. And for folks who don't know what those
Hmm.
are, they're overpasses created just specifically for wildlife. So it's really big, it's really wide, it's, grass and trees and bushes, and it just creates a land bridge over a major freeway or highway. And people go, "Why are we doing this? Why are we paying money for this?" And I think that insurance companies should be helping pay for that, because that is going to
Mm.
drastically reduce their costs over a fixed rate of time, say 5 or 10 years. Yes, obviously it's a significant upfront cost because it's a lot of construction, and it doesn't help anybody get to and from work. Not really, right? There's no on paper use case for the
Hmm.
individual driver until you hit that animal that's crying to cross the road, and now you've got an insurance claim, and that insurance is the one who's going to have to pay that out. So that's one of those things that I think insurance should be paying more for, is these land bridges for wildlife. And then everybody wins because we get better wildlife populations, we get less incidents on the road. Anyway, so I promised I wouldn't go off on that one, but so something to think about.
Yeah.
Insurance
I
companies should pay
am
for wildlife bridges.
I am super curious to know, maybe you can hunt for this. Does it
Maybe.
actually seem like there are fewer accidents? Because in my neck of the woods, they have wildlife tunnels, like under Highway
Okay.
17. And it seems like the smarter animals use them and the dumber animals do not. So deer definitely don't use the wildlife tunnel. Mountain lions do. Mountain lions apparently are now crossing around and wandering wherever because they were too
Yeah.
cautious to cross the highway,
See,
and
yeah,
now they're off, eating
I
people's
think
dogs somewhere else.
I think I, we're going to move past that. I think
They're
the
eating the
argument
dogs. They're eating the
is,
cats.
oh my God, we're really going to move past that. I think that what we're looking at is a
Bad
tunnel
Alex.
would be scary, right? I think that's one where if you're
Hmm.
an animal and you're a skittish animal, that's a kill box, that's a danger zone. You can't get in, you can't
Mm.
get out. And having a overpass where you see sky, where the terrain looks similar, you can look down and go, "Oh, that's scary. That's the highway, right?" But the highway is now the river, and instead of trying to cross the river, you're now just going across the land. So I think the answer there is
Hmm.
tunnels are not the way. It is the bridges.
Hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, but
Deer are just so
before
impossibly dumb.
I understand that. I almost hit one yesterday. And they just
This is going to offend and probably alienate some of our viewers, but I hate deer so much. They're so horrible.
that's it's a bigger conversation for a different time. He's not a no reason deer
Okay,
hater, but
got to back this up. Yes, they're adorable and they're cute off in a distance, somewhere. But they hop in the garden, deer fence 10 feet tall, and they still manage to hop in,
doesn't
and then
matter.
they clear it out. They just eat
Yeah,
everything. They're
right,
voracious, and
correct.
nothing we can do will keep them out.
On a
But
similar
all
topic,
those
that's not the same
got to
at
bring the
all.
mountain lions in.
We're just trying to move this forward. Alex, we had a viewer question that I want to make sure we
We
get to.
did,
And
and here we go.
about this or that, not tunnels or bridges, but something a little bit different.
Yep. So let's play the viewer question. And if you want to send us your viewer question, you can always email us at hey@autobuyersguide.com. You can send us a voice memo there as well. And let's just roll right through this one here.
Hi, Alex. This is Assad from Florida and Miami. I am a big fan of your content, and I think you're just the right person to ask this question to. I have a Volvo C40. It comes with Pirelli Scorpion AllSeasons that are electric tuned tires. Living in Miami, I'm considering switching to summer EV-focused Michelin Sport. I think they're called Michelin Sport Elect. What are your thoughts on switching from all-season to summer tires when it comes to EVs, if they are both EV-focused? Am I sacrificing comfort, range, or is it a win-win situation considering that I live in a warm climate all the time? Would be very curious to hear your recommendations. And one last note, the Michelin are rated at B for their friction, whereas the Pirelli come at A. The rating is A. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And again, thank you very much for all the great content you provide.
So, Alex, can I start off with this one? Some of the things I know, and then some of the same
Mm-hmm.
questions I have. And, for folks who don't know, Alex is doing this a lot longer than I have. So he's sat in a lot of tire presentations and tried a different bunch of tires. So here's what I know.
Mm-hmm.
Summer tires are not as summer oriented as some people think they are. And the issues that you run into or the concerns people have are not always the same. And just for the record, when I am due to replace my tires on my Tesla, I am looking at swapping over to some summer tires. Now, admittedly, in the Northwest, we don't really get much snow. And if we do, I do happen to have a truck. But I would actually probably just keep a second set of tires on the side so I could do that. But I wouldn't get snow tires because I don't need snow tires. I would get, at worst, all-weather tires instead of all-season, kind of a cut above. I also would say that when it comes to electric-specific tires, for me, the question is about what makes it electric specific. Most of this is not just random branding and saying, hey, you should come over here. A lot of them are built for the different weights. And if your EV is not a particularly heavy EV, I'm not saying it's going to not matter it's not going to matter, but it might not matter as much. So my car is only 3,600 pounds, and there are a lot of other EVs in that size category that end up being 4,500 pounds. And that's a huge difference. But one of the benefits you get with an electric tire is going to be normally something like some noise isolation. It's going to be more of there's going to be a foam, or they're going to basically cut the tread of the tire to make sure that the harmonics are a little bit gentler, those sorts of things. So I'm also curious in the question, our viewer said that the friction ratings were B for the all seasons B for the summer tires and A for the all seasons. I'm wondering if that's probably based on their categorization, not on an overall chart. But from here, Alex, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about the traction rating is it's primarily about wet pavement traction. So the friction rating is really just talking about like stopping distance, etc., on wet pavement. So his all-season option here is probably going to be a little bit better in wet weather as far as stopping than this particular summer tire, but grip in the dry is probably going to be superior in the summer tire. That's usually what they're focused on. And some of this will also depend on the temperature outside. So all-season tires are designed to operate, as the name sort of implies, be this general tire that's mostly focused on mild weather, but will work fine in the summer and will work acceptably in winter at temperatures below about 45 degrees down to, somewhat below freezing. We're talking Fahrenheit here for anybody listening outside of the United States. And summer tires generally really lose their capability grip-wise below about 40 to 45 degrees, so well before freezing, definitely down there on the colder side of things. And exactly where that point crosses over with an all-season tire just depends on what tires we're talking about. So on the EV focus side of things, it's sort of two separate things. That's summer versus all season. So yes, you may give up a bit of performance in the wet, depending on the tire, but not as much as some people think. I know that in California, especially where we don't get rain really in the summer for most of California, there is this perception that summer tires don't work when it rains. They may not grip as well as some wet weather focused all season tires, but depending on the design of the summer tire, they can work really quite well in the wet. It's just that in California, that's baked into our brains because the summer's different. And in Washington, D.C., it's wet all summer long.
As soon as it rains, It's not summer, and the tires will not work.
Summer's right, exactly. Right, it rains, It's not summer anymore. So there's that part there. So you should see, especially, generally speaking, slightly firmer sidewalls. You'll probably get slightly harsher ride quality, just a little bit more of those small imperfections in the cabin in a sportier tire because you need that grip, that cornering ability, so stronger sidewall to support the tire. Different tread blocks, rather. So generally speaking, you get a slightly larger contact patch effectively on the ground because the tread blocks tend to be beefier with smaller sipes and smaller channels between. Sipes are the little wiggly kind of razory joints in the tire that help block the tread blocks together so that way they kind of act like a grippy squeegee on the ground, for lack of a better term. On the electric versus non-electric tire front, as you alluded to, there's definitely some focus on acoustic performance because EVs tend to be quieter. Structurally, the bigger difference between these, that's sort of a design thing. They will have different tread patterns as a result of that. On the structural side of things, the changes tend to be, again, slightly firmer sidewalls because of the weight of the vehicle. So they can have different load categories and load capabilities versus a similar tire in that manufacturer's lineup that's not electric focused. But then the tire compound itself definitely changes pretty dramatically for an EV focused tire. And so in EV focused tires, they generally use a significantly higher portion of silica in the rubber. So a tire is not just rubber like a rubber band. There's actually a lot of chemistry going on in the tire. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that they're actually basically grit particles that are put into the rubber to make it act kind of like one of those exfoliating sponges that you use at home. Think of it that way, or like an exfoliating bar of soap. So in the rubber, they actually put sand, basically silica, in the rubber compound, and that actually gives it this extra grip on the road. And intriguingly, the grip that silica tends to offer on most paved surfaces does not come at the expense of rolling resistance. So the resistance the tire gives you rolling down the road versus being able to turn into a corner or accelerate or brake, that's a critical thing. So silica tends to perform really well in these situations where the tire is trying to do something different than just roll down the road, where it's scrubbing across the side, resisting this motion with the road surface. But when you're just rolling down the road, silica does not offer much resistance compared to rubber. So that's why it's much higher content in these tires. And one of the reasons that these tires end up being, sorry, there's a little bug floating around here. But one of the reasons that these tires tend to be more expensive than a non-EV focused tire is that the silica actually wears the manufacturing components down pretty rapidly. So you're sandblasting the inside of your tire manufacturing equipment when you're running this high silica content rubber through the equipment. So it has to get replaced more frequently. Therefore, we have the higher costs associated with some of these EV tires. So that's the basics of what's going on there. The bottom line is I wouldn't worry about it. If you want better grip, you want better stopping performance for most days, definitely go with the summer tire. If you're worried about wet weather performance, you might want to really look at which summer tire you want And Tire Rack, we're not sponsored by them, but they do a lot of tire ratings because they have the ability to get the tires and just run them through test tracks, etc. So you can look at Tire Rack and see how different tires perform. I will just sort of side note to this one. We do very regularly get invited to tire events, and I usually turn most of the tire event things down because of this lack of comparison. Tire shopping is really weird. You go down to your local tire shop and they'll try and sell you on what they think is a great tire. And a lot of this tends to be on brand allegiance, just because the dude behind the counter loves Bridgestone or whatever. Like he loves Continental, loves whatever, right?
Michelin,
or
General,
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or you're ending up at a Firestone store, right? And so it's owned by one of the tire companies, and they obviously have a reason to sell you their tires. Goodyear, same
or
example
Les
there.
Schwab has their own branding. Yeah.
Yeah. So same sort of problem in all these. You can also go to your original car manufacturer's dealer to buy a tire. And if you want the exact same performance that your car had when it was new, that's the tire you want, because car companies will actually modify or have the tire manufacturer modify tires for them for new vehicles. So if you have a Pilot Sport tire coming out of the factory on your Mustang, for instance, it's not necessarily the same tire that you'll be able to buy at another store outside of your dealer, because the manufacturers will request sometimes different tread patterns. Sometimes they'll request slightly different compounds because they need that tire to either last longer or they want better grip. So they want to be able to send that car out to us and have it stop on a dime, right? And so they're willing to sacrifice tire life for that. So maybe that tire actually has worse life than if you bought it from a Goodyear store, because Goodyear's going to have a warranty on it and that car didn't, right? For tire tread life.
The biggest secrets that is just not talked about, because let's just say Pilot Sport, right? P4s, whatever version of the tire. If you go back to the shop and say, not the dealer, you go to a shop and say, hey, I have these, can I order a set? They say, yeah, no problem. You are getting a different tire and it's going to perform differently. Are you going to immediately notice? Probably not. Those differences might be small. But if you want the exact same experience, you've been very happy with your tire, for better or worse, you got to go right back to the dealer and say, this is the one I want, because it's down to the specific coating. It is a different tire in some fashion. So that's a bit of a bummer. And if you want the experience that the manufacturer wants you to have, there are probably a summer tire option for you from Volvo. That would be the one you would want to go pursue. Everything else is a crapshoot. And that's why, tire testing is interesting, but when you don't have like for like to compare it against, it's very difficult. And there's only two types of tire reviews. I love my tire, I hated my tire. And they're not going to give you any information that is helpful to you. Oh, my tire.
There's that third type. Yeah, because there are those outlets that do the testing, like Tire Rack, etc. Yes. They will do testing, instrumented testing. That's where you got to go. Yeah.
And Tire Rack is
that's the problem.
Tool that I use often when I'm comparing a tire. And even then, you have to understand your specific use case is going to be different, but at least you have some frame of reference, which is how we do all of our testing. It's like, our mile per gallon loops are going to vary every day, but they're going to be at least some close to.
There's a process, there's a procedure. Yeah. I will say I do a lot of tire shopping on Tire Rack. I very rarely buy tires on Tire Rack because you can get a better deal often if you just hunt there on your Tire Rack and you're like, ooh, that's the one I want. And then you call the tire shops locally and you're like, hey, so Tire Rack is doing this. And they'll often either match or beat the price. And then you have one stop to go, and
we are not
it's a little easier there. But anyway. But I love the reviews there on Tire Rack and the ratings over there on Tire Rack.
If you want more performance, get the summer tire, but just know that more performance never means more comfort. And so there's just gonna be a bit of a trade-off.
Yeah. It's going to be a small trade-off, I will admit. But there's going to be a trade-off there. I will say I have never gone back to the dealer to buy a tire on anything that I have owned, because I've always wanted a different tire. And that is one of the beauties, really, of tires, in a way. We could do a whole episode on tires. But I say this frequently when we're doing reviews, it's like I would rather have a car that has a really well-dialed-in suspension, really well-dialed steering, etc., and is under-tired, because that is so easy to fix yourself. And some manufacturers will dive in and they'll compete with a car that has really wide tires from the factory, but the suspension is not great. And they're trying to compensate for that a little bit with the tires. Well, you can take something like and this is going to sound, some people are going to be real offended by this statement, but you could take an entry in the compact car segment with a fully independent rear suspension, a really well-designed fully independent rear suspension, like a Honda Civic hybrid, for instance, or actually a Hyundai Elantra hybrid has an independent suspension in the back. And you could put some really great tires on that and run circles around a Mazda 3, because the Mazda 3's rear suspension, it's not really great, especially on regular road surfaces where I am that are undulating and imperfect and expansion joints, etc. That non-independent rear suspension in the Mazda 3 is going to become real obvious when you start pushing it harder. It feels great from the factory, still a little under-tired there, but you can take things to a definite next level just simply by tire swapping. Civic Hybrid, I think, would be a great example. You put Civic Si tires on a Civic Hybrid, it's going to go faster than the Civic Si. It's going to stop at least once, probably shorter than a Civic Si.
Yep.
Brake fade problem, right? Bigger brakes. Put the Civic Si brakes on there if you want to. But it's also going to grip the road quite like an Si because the suspension's very, very similar.
Yep. So chase your dreams on tires, do what you want. If you're not worried about the wet weather, obviously you shouldn't be driving as fast in wet weather anyway, ideally. So I say go for the summer tire. I have never done it myself, but it's what I'm looking forward to doing on my Tesla as soon as these tires are worn through. But unfortunately, I'm really gentle on my tires. I'm about 40,000 miles, and I've got a lot of life left in them. So maybe I need
that is my vote. The only thing I would caution on is that you will see a reduction in range. How much of a reduction in range is going to depend on exactly the kind of driving you do. You're not really going to see a huge difference in city driving or I would say most combined cycle driving, but distance driving, highway driving, you will see a difference because rolling resistance is what's going to change there for a summer tire by and large. Is it going to be a big difference? No, it's probably going to be, 4 or 5%, something like that, maybe even less depending on the exact tires that we're pitting against one another. But in a car like the C40, because we have a C40 ourselves happenstantially, the range is already really small.
Especially if you're looking at an electric summer tire. Electric tires in general, one of their areas of focus is to have premium rolling resistance. They say we're not going for the maximum grip here. We're going for, hey, we can't cut your range in half. You'll never buy our tire again. So if that is of a concern, if road tripping and that sort of thing is on your radar, then at that point I would say yes, lean towards an electric summer tire than a standard summer tire, because that's going to focus on one end and probably not on the other.
And you may give up a tiny bit of grip for the performance electric summer tire, but it's not going to be a huge difference. When we had the Mach-E, I don't know how, it seems like ages ago, Mach-E GT didn't exist, but we already knew what kind of tire sizes it would be getting through the grapevine there. So we upgraded the wheels on our Mach-E, and we stuck some non-EV summer tires on it, and it definitely handled way better than a regular Mach-E. Solved the whole handling issue I had with the Mach-E. So another good example of this process. But it did obviously impact the range. In the Mach-E, it was not as big as we thought it would be, though. So going from a 225 all-season to a 245 with summer tire, I believe it was a Michelin Pilot Sport summer tire, if I recall correctly, non-EV focused, it only resulted in about a 5% drop in range. For me, that was actually perfectly acceptable, because it was only 15 miles-ish of range, and it actually made that Mach-E go down to about its EPA rating, because in our tests, we got over 300 miles of range in it, and then with the tires on it, it was more like 290, 280, something like that, and it was EPA rated for 279 at the time. So it actually kind of overshot the range estimates at the time. So that's why later Ford actually bumped those numbers up without actually substantially changing anything in the vehicle. They had decided to be really cautious and had taken some voluntary reductions to cut the range figure down. And then they decided, why are we doing that when Tesla's not doing that? Let's just bump them up through the roof. So that's how we ended where we are.
So hopefully that answered the question. But Alex, the other one that folks wanted to know, they wanted to hear about the baby story. And for folks who are not interested, now is a good time to sign out. But we also probably have the timestamp. So if you were at the very beginning and said, I just want to hear about the baby, we'll have that available for you.
Yes, so we are in Colombia because we had one child and we're having another child via surrogacy, so gestational surrogacy. So the birth mother is not the genetic mother. You buy the eggs on the egg bank, the clinic handles everything and coordinates the hospital visits, and the IVF and all of that jazz. And so basically we are down here. She was born on the 1st of June, and maybe we'll be home by June 24th, 25th, something like that. We have to get paperwork done here. So the one tricky twist with this is that we are in Colombia, Bogota, Colombia, and the reason there is simply cost. It's a lot less expensive to do it here than in the US. It's about half the cost, sometimes a third, depending on what we're talking. And that means that she will have a Colombian birth certificate and a Colombian passport to leave Colombia, but she will actually lose Colombian citizenship once all the paperwork is taken into account, because Colombia does not have traditional birthright citizenship. However, the U.S. does. So since we're U.S. citizens, she will be a U.S. citizen from birth. We just have to work through all the paperwork. So we have to go to the embassy, the consulate office. Contracts, blood tests have to be provided to prove that the child's ours. And then they issue a certificate of overseas birth and a passport the same day, and then they're like, bye, have fun. The peculiar part about that is that the Colombian birth certificate name and the U.S. birth certificate name don't need to match. You can just pick whatever name you want on the certificate of overseas birth.
You know what? We didn't like the way that sounded. Let's just do something different.
Because in Colombia, the last name's very, very codified, like how your child will be named. With the last name part, very, very firm in process. And then you'd have to do a name change after to change it if you wanted it to be something different. And in the US, they're just like, yeah, what do you want to name your kid? First, middle, last name. Hey, just pick anything you want. Just, which explains Elon Musk's children.
There you go.
Yeah. Explains Elon Musk's children though, right? So
yeah, whatever you want, just write it down.
Just fever dream, high on Adderall, and God knows what else. Just yeah, that's how that works. So
there you go.
So hopefully by July,
it's been a journey. This has been a long time.
Yeah, been a long time. Hopefully by July we'll be back home and sticking babies in baby seats, seeing how that goes. And then
you might have noticed there's a lot less of Alex on the channel at the moment. It takes time to go do these things, but he's not gone. He'll be back. He'll be in front of you talking about kid seats all the time.
Probably not doing as much travel for quite some time, so we'll see how that process goes. But that's it in a nutshell. Hope everybody's doing well out there. See all of you next time.
Adios.